Hi, third grade. When we left off, the Nazi soldier was chasing Rachel and Matt through the dark, smoke-filled streets, and bombs were dropping, and fires were blazing all around the city, and they're looking for help, trying to get away from him. Now, we don't know where Chief is right now, but I do recall that he had gotten a scent of Matt somewhere. He knows Matt is around. The bomb is in front of us, Rachel said. There, on the sidewalk. Where? Are you sure? It's right there, Matt. We can't turn around. The soldier's behind us, and it's right there. Rachel shoved Matt backward. He almost fell, then caught his balance. He didn't see the bomb, so he couldn't tell which way to run. Through his panic-stricken eyes, the street seemed to turn into a maze of fire and death, and he froze. Then Rachel tugged Matt's hand, and he unfroze. He felt a flash of relief as he followed her. He didn't always need to know what to do. Sometimes he could rely on his friends. As they raced back along the smoke-filled street, a flare of light burned suddenly behind them when that firebomb ignited. Heat smacked the back of Matt's neck. He ran until the heat faded, then glanced at Rachel. I guess it was right there. Are you sure? She asked. He snorted. Where is he? We need to... Shuffle, drag, shuffle, drag. From the smoke and darkness in front of them, the German trotted closer. Listen, Rachel said. I hear him. He's coming. Not him, she said. Voices. Then Matt heard them too. Men calling to each other in the next street, men with English accents. Civil defense workers or firemen, men who would save them. He and Rachel sprinted toward the intersection. They just needed to get around the corner before the German got to them. Then they could run for the men who'd help them. They just needed to beat the German in this deadly race. Matt ran faster than he'd ever run, except Rachel was smaller and younger. In a few steps, he'd shot ahead of her. He slowed down until he was running beside her. Come on, Rach. We're almost there. Just another 20 feet and... But the German burst from the shadows, looming between them and the voices. That is far enough. The German. Rachel and Matt jerked to a halt. Rachel whimpered in Yiddish while Matt's stomach tied into knots. They know we're here, Matt told the German. They're coming for us. They're on their way. The German limped at them from the corner. His knife swayed in his fist. Did you learn that from me? He asked Matt. How to lie like that? They're coming, Matt insisted, moving to the side to get around the German. My brother's there. He's a fireman. He knows where... Despite his limp, the German sprang between them and the corner. Your brother? I do not think so. When he scuffled closer, Matt and Rachel backed fearfully away. Fearfully and slowly. The German soldier was bigger than they were, and he moved faster. If they ran, he would catch them. I think the German wiped blood from his face with his sleeve. Yes, we must go somewhere private. Help, Matt shouted. Somebody help us. Like that little street, the German pointed his knife at the alley. Schnell, move. Help, Rachel yelled. Chief, Matt shouted. Chief. Nobody can hear you, the German said, heading them into the narrow alley. Not through all this noise and tumult. Chief! Rachel shouted. There is nowhere left to run, the German said. Matt swallowed and backed away. If you do anything to us, they'll know you're here. You are just two foolish young children, the man said. Caught in an air raid. Nobody will look twice. Help! Rachel screamed. There is no help, the man said, limping forward. The orange glow of fire touched the smoke above the city, but the alley itself was as dark as a nightmare. Matt felt tears in his eyes. He wanted to cry. For himself, for Rachel, for Eric, for his parents. He swallowed instead. He put one arm protectively in front of Rachel and backed closer to the end of the alley. The dead end. A brick wall rose behind them, 2 stories high. Help! Rachel yelled again. It is time to be quiet, the German said, stalking closer. As quiet as the grave. Chief! Matt shouted. Chief! Chapter 23. Chief's ears pricked up, tracking the whistling sound through the air. One of the fire rocks would land right where Landry and the women were standing. And somehow they didn't know it. They couldn't hear. Those humans. Chief sprang forward and barked at them. Goodness, one of the women said. What does he want? He hears someone in the buildings, Landry said. Chief, find. Chief barked again. Move, move. What is it, boy? Landry asked. Is he part wolf? The other woman said. Why, he's a trifle, fierce. Don't worry, Landry said. He won't hurt you or... And then the whistling grew louder, closer. Chief raised the ruff of his fur and started growling deep in his throat. I think... Chief laid his ears flat against his head and growled at the women. A fire rock hit on the other side of the buildings, then another one closer. But the humans still didn't notice. Chief growled louder and slunk at the woman, slowly and sleek. Still holding the man on the stretcher, the woman backed quickly away from his bared teeth. They weren't stupid. Landry crouched down. What's wrong, boy? The shrill whistles of the fire rocks were speeding at them. This wasn't the time for yipping. This was the time for action. So Chief leaped at Landry and knocked him to the ground. Hey! Landry shouted, rolling away. Bad dog! Chief nipped his leg and nipped his arm. Landry kept rolling, and the woman with the injured man kept backing away. Chief raised his gaze from Landry and bared his teeth at them until they moved behind the car. What's he doing? The woman said. What's wrong with him? When Chief growled at her, Landry shoved him away and tried to stand. He steadied himself. Chief jumped on top of him as hard as he could. Landry fell with an oof. He's attacking, one of the women yelled. He's run mad. Watch out. He's crazy. Just then the fire rock slammed into the ground, right where they'd been standing just moments before. The blast exploded into Chief's side and flung him off Landry. His ears rang painfully. His vision blurred. The smell of brick dust filled his nostrils, and he thought he heard Matt's voice calling, Chief, help! The sky swirled above Chief, and he couldn't tell what he'd heard over the throbbing in his ears. The sense dulled, and the building seemed to wobble. He saved you, one of the women said, after the dust had settled. He saved us all, the other woman said. Landry knelt beside Chief and touched his side gently. Chief, Chief, I've got you. I've got you. Shh. You're a good boy. What a good, good boy. Chief licked his hand. I'll never doubt you again, boy, Landry said. Not ever. How bad is his wound? One of the women asked. Landry's fingers touched Chief's coat here and there, as soft as butterflies. I think he's okay, thank God. He got the wind knocked out of him, that's all. The world still wobbled around Chief, though. And he had really heard Matt calling for him? Was it true? He thought he'd heard Rachel, too. Except he must have imagined those two pups yelling for him, because now everything sounded muffled and far away. Chief tried to stand, but his legs were too weak. Landry held him tight and said his name over and over. Chief could smell the relief on Landry and the affection. He listened closer, but he couldn't hear Matt or Rachel. He couldn't hear anything.